Soren, the Shrewd Strategist. I don't know what it is about strategist or tactician characters, but they seem to have a habit of adopting a wide stat spread. Like Robin, other Robin, Soren. Of these stat spreads, however, Soren's probably got a little bit better tools to work with due to the fact that his speed is pretty good. Let's take a look at a budget build first. So if you have a Soren and you're not doing a heck of a lot with him, you can use this build right here, which I would highly recommend. My Soren obviously is merged +2, and he happens to be plus defense minus HP. So I think from those two merges, he ended up getting +1 to each stat except for defense. He's got a pretty high attack with Rex Caliber here. But due to the fact that the might is 13, and it's not giving you any additional value outside of that, you could easily replace that tome with something else that gives you an added benefit that would be more valuable than the extra 2 points of might. So I've got attack +3 on this Soren, because if you're going to be utilizing Water Sweep, you'll be wanting to get some value out of his enemy phase. Drawback I like to put on ranged units. I feel like they get the most value out of that particular assist skill. But with Water Sweep, you'll be primarily using that to initiate onto targets in order to get value out of that. When you do that, you'll normally also end up taking a hit or two in that endeavor. So I put attack +3 to increase both his player phase and enemy phase utility. Fortify Res he comes with, and Phantom Speed is probably the sacred seal you should put on him, especially since I believe he's the only fucking unit in the game that can actually get any value out of that sacred seal. Aside from maybe a unit using Wind Sweep or Alm, who comes with Wind Sweep. Other than that, I couldn't imagine putting Phantom Speed on any other unit, because nobody's exactly using that on defense. There's no Water Sweep or Wind Sweep meta going on. Fire Sweep just does its thing regardless of speed anyway, so it's just weird, that Phantom Speed Sacred Seal. In a way, that's almost like a direct buff to Soren, considering he's the only one that can use it. So, for the express purpose of proccing Water Sweep here, a regular Soren will essentially be able to get it to proc against some of the faster units in the game without buffs, of course. Soren has Iceberg right there, because obviously with resistance of 30 or 29, you're pretty much guaranteed 14 or 15 damage every time it activates. Granted, he won't be the best character in the game with this particular build, but you can get a surprising amount of value out of it regardless. Especially with this attack +3. I mean, you can get that skill very easily from, what, 4-star Cecilia? So I'm sure you would have that skill in abundance. Now, if you were to think about it, meta A-slot skills like Death Blow, Fury, Life and Death, those are the ones that literally came off the top of my mind. For example, Death Blow, you initiate and you get +6 to your attack. On defense, you get nothing, obviously. These are very obvious observations. Now, when you think about it, attack plus 3, in theory, has the same value as death blow, as long as you're using it for both player phase and enemy phase. Player phase, you're getting plus 3. That's half the value of death blow at the moment. Enemy phase, death blow gets nothing, you get plus 3. So grand total, it's 6 and 6. Maybe that sounds a little bit ridiculous, maybe too dumbed down, but I kind of like the analogy and I wanted to mention it. And besides, at the end of the day, who doesn't just want 3 extra points in attack anyway? That's like a free boon. So with this particular build, without an attack bane, he can reach like 49, 50 attack, which ain't too shabby at all. And he would need that sort of attack, especially if he's going to be using Water Sweep. You know, getting that one hit. So now I want to move on to my favorite build thus far, which is essentially the Raven and Triangle Adept combo. When you use any Raven tome, you're virtually compelled to use Triangle Adept. You just can't ignore the added value. It's almost double the value that you would otherwise get out of Triangle Adept and Raven Tome, honestly. They're just perfect together. Generally and broadly speaking, Raven Tome plus Triangle Adept essentially counters half the characters in the game doesn't even matter what Raven Tome color. Just very broadly speaking, there's 4 colors. Let's just say all the characters are even among all the colors. Boom, counter half of them. And let's also mention that weapon advantage only stacks up to 40%. Now I only have Triangle Adept 2, and that's because I didn't have 3 available to me at the moment. So this is also half a budget build. I couldn't justify to myself promoting Selena to 5-star just for Triangle Adept 3. I'd rather wait for a 4-star Roy to remedy the situation rather than use my feathers that way. So we're just going to stick with Triangle Adept 2. So let's just imagine that everything's at a solid 40%, right? So back to the weapon advantage thing. It only stacks up to 40%. It won't go any higher than that. And the disadvantage won't go any lower than that too. Plus or minus 40%. So if you, in theory, had a gemmed weapon like Emerald Axe and Triangle Adept, then it will cap. It will cap at 40%. You won't be able to get at 60%. You won't be able to get 55 or even 45. It'll cap solidly at 40. So if you're using both, switch one of them out. Now, I wanted to give Bowbreaker to this Soren, and I actually forgot to replace that seal there, because since I'm not using Water Sweep on this particular build, Phantom Speed is essentially useless. So we'll just go ahead and let Roy have that for no reason. I actually like having the attack seal on Soren anyway. It kind of makes up for the fact that Grown Raven is only an 11 might tome as opposed to Rexcalibur, which was 13. So despite the fact that you're losing 2 might out of that swap, with the added value of Triangle Adept, that gives you an additional 20% when you are in advantage against a unit. 40% can be quite substantial when it comes to defending and attacking. So I really like the value you can get out of player phase and enemy phase. Soren is so versatile. I love it. He can pretty much do whatever job you want him to do. Except for, you know, I don't know, take a sword in the face. He obviously can't do that, but you shouldn't expect that out of him either. Drawback once again, because I like ranged units with this skill. They get a bunch of value out of it. Fortify resistance, he comes with it. I primarily keep it on him, mostly because he is paired with my Ike in my main team, who basically nukes anything red and green, and that Fortify resistance helps solidify that, especially against mages. Don't mind the fact that they're S-ranked or anything. Yeah, just ignore that. They're really good friends. They're just pals, totally platonic. So because of the fact that Ike nukes anything red or green, Soren, built the way he is, nukes anything that could potentially give Ike a problem. But that's probably talking too outwardly perspective, because we're supposed to be talking about the character in this particular build. So, due to the fact that my Soren happens to have plus defense and minus HP. Now there's a little saying, let me get off topic again just a little bit. There's a little saying I like. Prevention is better than cure. In which case, you're taking less damage, so you don't have to worry about HP. His resistance is good enough, it gets the job done. Normally people would think his defense is a dump stat. You wouldn't want that to be a boon. I, however, found value in the defense boon in the fact that this would allow him to be able to take damage from a particular bow users and most of the dagger users. Well, most of the bow users too. The ones that he can't take damage from are pretty obvious. Brave Lynn, Brydelia. It's hard to talk about the meta without mentioning Reinhardt, Brave Lynn, and Brydelia. Those are literally the three that just come off the top of my head. If he had Bowbreaker, he'd be able to bait and counter each of these units easily and survive. As long as they weren't too highly merged and in the offensive category with a Brave Bow. That's very specific. That's also very... Anyway, despite the fact that he doesn't have Bowbreaker, he can still get the job done as long as he initiates rather than being initiated on. And the only thing that hurts him in this case is the very offensive ones that he wouldn't be able to safely bait and counter in the first place. But otherwise, having that 20 defense, that extra value of being able to take 40% less damage from any bow user, any dagger user, essentially gives him an immense amount of player phase and enemy phase value against colorless units and blue units. I should probably mention Green Tomebreaker here, because I kept saying stuff about Bowbreaker. I couldn't give Soren Bowbreaker because I didn't have the skill available, which only comes from Setsuna. But he's given Green Tomebreaker mostly due to the fact that he's got very good resistance value. And when you think of green tome users in general, you'd usually think of like Nino or Sonya, who tend to be very quickly or glass cannony. So if you can negate that second attack of theirs, then you can bait and counter or attack and secure a kill from those particular units as well. So this kind of setup essentially gives Soren the ability to, broadly speaking again, counter blue units, colorless units, and green tones. One thing I almost forgot to mention was his speed. It's kind of funny he gets that particular speed value, which it isn't too high, it isn't too low, so you really couldn't go wrong with either using Water Sweep or something to replace it. It's very interesting, but I figure I would prefer to double rather than to attack and not take a hit in response. Because if you're not securing kills, you're not winning. So in this case, I actually did replace Water Sweep, used Green Tome Breaker because the other breakers didn't really make much sense. Lance Breakers wouldn't, well, maybe, but I think Green Tome Breaker would give a little bit more utility rather than just straight nuking the same things over and over. Most Lance users don't have the highest resistance the way it is, so I just felt that Green Tome Breaker was the optimal skill in this case. I would like Bow Breaker, but that wasn't available. Let me know about your builds if they differed from the two I showed here. Or even if you have a unique build in mind, let me know in the comments section below. And other than that, thanks for listening and have a good day. Hopefully you learned a thing or two.